Hey, good morning, good people, and welcome to another episode of The Flow, slightly edgy commentary on politics, life, culture, society, and what it means to be human. We have a wonderful guest in the studio today, Eric Robinson, 24 years in the FBI, 24 years in investigations and human intelligence, and he's going to give us some real insights into institutions, and he's got a crazy story. So just hang in there, folks. I'm going to start with a substantive question, and then we'll back up. And Eric, I want you to tell your story because Eric started out his career as a Baptist pastor. And we want to hear about how that transformation came about. But first, I want to ask you this. I always kind of put forward the idea that democracies are not built on granite. They're not built on solid stone. They're built on faith and trust, and mostly trust in the institutions that we have and that we hope are administered, correctly. So would you talk a little bit about, the institutional nature of the FBI and the DOJ and how some of the chaos that we're seeing today really doesn't seep down into the fundamental basis of the everyday FBI special agent working on a case?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. Thanks for having me. And that's precisely what I would say if someone asked me. So, from one administration to another, there's always going to be small changes, sometimes larger changes in how the Department of Justice works. And whether this administration, the last one, ones before, uh, the headlines that people respond to or say, I'm losing faith in the FBI. I don't believe they're doing things right. Why would they do this? The headlines that grab people's attention come from Washington, D.C. They come from those involved in the administration of the FBI who have worked their way up. They're career agents and they've been involved for a long time, but they're more career oriented, and so they're out there to influence policies and larger scale matters. And 99.5% of the FBI is not that.
Mm-hmm.
So the agents and the analysts and the support technicians and the auto mechanics, they're just looking to do their job well because we have auto mechanics in the
That's right.
FBI.
Sure,
Yeah,
of course.
great guys too.
We don't think of that, but you guys have auto mechanics and you have cooks and you have everything. You have the cleaning folks, you have regular everyday people. So
Well,
we don't.
the auto mechanics are the ones that I always treated as well as I could because they're the ones we depended upon the most. But all those field operators are looking to do what's right. They have their cases in front of them, and they're just looking to make investigations. And the last thing they want is a 202 area code showing up on their phone with someone from DC trying to get involved in their daily life. So, yeah, I've been there before where you get someone from headquarters calling and trying to get involved, and y- they there's really often little benefit. They're looking to uh, just maintain their positions or look good for someone else above them. So, to your point, I fully agree with what I think you're insinuating, and that is the agent that's down the street whose kid is going to soccer camp just like yours is or goes to church with you. They just want to do what's right, and they do.
And I mean, the FBI has a long and storied tradition of excellence and professionalism. And, on those lower layers, it seems that is something that maintains. And I noticed that after, we spoke initially, I started watching the news reports and I noticed that when they showed a crime scene or something like that where the FBI was, those guys were just, doing their work as normal and taking care of business. But on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of chaos up at the upper levels, and we're seeing a lot of people leave the agency. Not only your agency, the FBI, but just recently, DOJ is just losing people on ethical, I guess, for ethical reasons. They just are not willing to do what's being asked of them. I think there's 3,000 DOJ lawyers have left, which is about a quarter of the force. Do you hear any scuttlebutt that we're losing expertise and professionalism among some of our folks? And I guess my question comes down to this: do you feel we can still trust the FBI?
Well, I feel like you can. There's going to be measures taken that people might feel are abuse, and yet we still have checks and balances in the law where someone could be investigated or charged, and yet that's a significant hassle in someone's life, and yet there is a guideline that it butts up against, which is the law. So you can investigate someone, you can interrupt their lives, you can bring some shame, but ultimately they have to prove in a court that they've broken the law, which that's a little bit of the difference between the DOJ attorneys and FBI, which is, I can be directed like, hey, you need to carry out this search warrant or look into this person, and I can do my job. And then the next step is in the hands of the attorney, which is just untenable to say now bring charges. So I can get evidence or have lack of evidence, and when I bring that to a prosecutor, now they're stuck with having to try to bring a case before judges that they know may not go forward. I've been there where I brought legitimate cases to prosecutors that I know these guys did wrong and been declined because it's not strong enough. It's not a guarantee in court, and they can't tie up their time. And yet,
I mean, to be fair, sometimes it is a good case and it's a strong case, and they still decline it because they just say we have limited
yep,
resources and we only have so many. We only have so many prosecutors, and we only have so much court time in a year, and we just can't fit this in.
yeah, absolutely. Like it took a while for me to understand this, that even though my case is probably winnable, the attorneys can't, at least on the federal level, can't gamble with the likelihood that a case will go to trial because that's going to tie them up for a month. And now here is one less attorney. And in the Toledo, Ohio, Northern District of Ohio, Western Division, we only had a handful of prosecutors. So you can't have 6, 7 prosecutors and then one of them is out and then another one is out and then the others are getting burdened. So, yeah, even on legitimate cases, there are plenty of times where things get declined.
Well, and that kind of brings up that whole lack of resources thing, brings up another question to my mind, and that we hear in the news that, let's say with this Epstein file thing, that there were hundreds of FBI agents assigned to do specific jobs with the Epstein files to find out if certain people, especially the president's name, came up in the files. Now, I'm not going to get into the question whether that's an appropriate thing or not, but if a bunch of agents are assigned to do something like that, it necessarily takes them away from other stuff. Am I accurate with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we had there's always TDYs or temporary duties that agents can either raise their hand for or are called away for, or every division is mandated to give up 5 agents or 3 to the immigration push that we had. They're taken away from violent crimes or counterterrorism, healthcare fraud, whatever it might be. And so cases are put on hold and informants are not being contacted for a month or two. So you lose some of that traction on momentum that somebody might have had.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, before we get too far into the weeds here, let's back up just a second and tell us your story. How did it come to be? How how did it come? It's funny. My father spoke with a Hungarian accent like Dracula, and one of the things I would bring him ideas, and he would say, "How does it come to be that?" My son should ask me. So, Eric, I'll say to you, how does it come to be that a Baptist pastor winds up in human intelligence?
Yeah, how does a Baptist pastor who's never had any experience in law enforcement or handled a firearm get into the FBI and then end up on a SWAT team for the majority of that time too? I worked up the usual level of youth pastor and then assistant pastor, and then in 1995 or six, I planted a church in Western New York with a small core of Christians, and we were doing church the way I thought it should be, and we're doing great, reaching out to people and seeing results. And the difficulty that I had, which I wasn't special from any other minister, actually I was deficient in that when people came to me with their life issues, their problems, I was incapable of separating their burdens from me bearing them. And so people have problems and they go to their pastor. That's the normal chain of command there.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, I had a stress related headache every single day of my life for 2 years. And it just came to a point where I told my wife, I've got to find something else because I can't do this anymore. So I applied for two jobs. One I was overqualified for, and they turned me down. And one I was underqualified for, I thought, and they said, yeah, let's see where this goes. And so in 2002, I joined the FBI. I had studied.
Wait.
Okay.
Gotta back up here just a second. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of career choices. It just seems like, you could have walked over a bridge, but you decided to walk into the water. I mean, come on. Why was that one of your choices?
Bob, that's an easy answer.
Yeah.
Because the FBI is cool. As you said, it's a storied institution. It's the greatest law enforcement agency in the world. And I thought, my wife's out of my league, and yet we're together for 33 years. Like, the pretty girl isn't going to go out with you unless you ask. And I thought I might as well ask. And I had studied Islam in college.
Mm-hmm.
I had trained had practiced in outreach to Muslims. So my application was in process. 9/11 hits, and I have a feeling that probably was part of why they said, okay, we've got an Al Qaeda problem. Let's take a chance on this guy.
And not only that, I can imagine that after 9/11, you felt that was a place you could serve.
It was. So many people had said 9/11, I'm in. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I had a classmate who had been in the FBI for 9 years, out for 8, and was a state senator in Arkansas. 9/11 happens, and he said, I want back in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so now, so you're in the FBI. Wow, that's great. And did you find the training difficult? I mean, all of a sudden you're dealing with firearms and all kinds of stuff that had to be somewhat foreign to you.
Yeah, I remember early on with the firearms, like I'm skipping rounds off the pavement while other guys are shooting fairly well. So they get more proficient, and I just got proficient faster because I was a clean slate. So by the time we finished, okay, I know what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the training was not an issue. We're learning law, we're learning procedures. The biggest thing was understanding the FBI, that this huge organization that I say, and I'm probably wrong with this, after 24 years in, I probably understand 75% of it. There are things I would learn every week, like, oh, I didn't know we had that, we could do that, that these people serve us in this way. So there's so much to it that that was uh, the big thing to get my arms around. That wow, how do we even use resources in the FBI? What's available to us?
Tell me if I understand the relationship correctly. The FBI, of course, we know that you do fraud and you do, federal crimes and the like, but also there's a big anti-terrorism, counterterrorism facet of the FBI. If I understand it correctly, the CIA is foreign FBI.
Yeah.
And the FBI is domestic CIA. and it's not an exact metaphor, but am
Right.
I kind of on point?
Right, and the majority of CIA officers are going to serve overseas, and yet there's always stationed officers in the United States, and then they would work in conjunction with us in order to carry out any type of interactions. They had to have a partner to uh, justify what they were doing. And so we had interactions with them. I never did when I worked criminal cases, but then working
Hmm.
counterterrorism, now we'd have CIA officers working with us, talking about our informants, what type of contacts they had overseas. And then we're working with them because now we're getting clearance through the CIA for our informants to work overseas or make contacts with people overseas. We had to get their clearance from chiefs of station in that territory to say, yeah, it's okay for us to talk to this guy, and then they're vetting our informants to make sure they're clean too.
Right. Because you're trying to follow the constitutional mandate that the CIA is not supposed to work domestically. But obviously, if there's a terrorism threat, it's going to take place on our territory.
Yeah.
So you got to do that. So I guess the next question that I would have for you is, we hear about counterterrorism activities and that this stuff goes on, but can you clue us in, like, how active is all of that stuff? I mean, are we, we hear that there's a million, I don't know, 1,747 cyber attacks every 15 minutes. We hear all these things about, foreign governments and foreign agents and actors, trying to weasel their way in. What is the risk factor as far as you know?
Well, no one does know, and that's the issue. Is that many times the actual events, if there is a terrorist act, it's going to be a historical case because we're responding to something we didn't know, and now we're following up. And yet we have so in the Cleveland division, we've got two cyber squads, and one works international. Like they're looking at those foreign actors trying to infiltrate and get involved, and and then we have our counterterrorism. We have our counterintelligence that's seeing how are these people coming to steal resources and secrets. With counterterrorism, we're looking to introduce informants, or we're getting tips from the public of uh, individuals who are speaking of violence. So anytime we're involved in a terrorist investigation, there has to be a threat of destruction of property or violence that's ideological. So years ago, again, around 2001, that's actual events that turned into more of terrorist financing, where Americans weren't plotting to create harm in the United States, but they were funding terrorist organizations such as Hamas or Hezbollah. And those cases were difficult to prove because once the money goes overseas, it's hard to track it. And then after a time, then we moved to domestic terrorism, where you'd have um, folks who look like you and me are now threatening to carry out violence. And then, the eyes get off of the international threats. And now the Bureau is pushing, like, we need to look again to foreign actors or those who have ideologies that are coming from outside the US. So it's, it comes and goes. And, you can call it a sine curve, or you can call it a pendulum, where we focus on one thing and then another one rises, and then we get our eyes over here, and then we've got to come back to the next threat.
So, each administration that comes in has its own priorities, and one of the things about, the executive branch of government is that they're given the job of taking the law and figuring out how to apply it. And part of that is discretion. I understand they set priorities and the like. Um, do you feel, I mean, from, I know that you're retired, but you still have some contacts in the bureau. Do you feel that the current administration's priorities are helpful or distracting?
Well, there's definitely some distractions. Robert Mueller was my first director, and he was just granite. So I didn't have a beard in the FBI because you didn't have a beard in the FBI, and you know that's fine. But he also didn't cause waves. He didn't draw attention to himself. And then we have Comey, and he was a little more agent focused, so that's good. But then he was also a little bit too much in front of the cameras. We get Chris Wray, who for me seemed like a very good balance of speaking up to defend the FBI and correct things, but also just supporting agents.
I liked him. I liked him. I thought he was a down to earth guy. When I saw him testify,
Yeah,
I trusted him, and I felt like he was telling me the straight scoop.
yeah.
And that's kind of what I mean about trusting institutions. That when the spokesperson, the head of the institution, seems trustworthy, the whole institution seems trustworthy.
Which is true, and yet I go back to your first question, which is different administrations will have different focuses, and it trickles down a bit, and so that may affect to some degree. So, for example, under Trump's first term, with Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, there was a mandate. Hey, there's all these Black Lives Matter protests. We need to find out where Antifa is and if they're going to cause destruction of property, because that had been happening in some cases. And so, okay, now that's an open option. And so we'd look into it, and at least in our area, we couldn't find anybody. The one case I had helping one of our task force officers on a guy who said he was in Antifa, like he was a dishwasher at a restaurant. He didn't do anything. So you can say, well, okay, here's a leaning that we have, and yet it always is going to come down to, are those people here and are they breaking the law?
Mm-hmm.
And even if they do say go find Antifa, and yet we've got this actual terrorist plot going on, nobody's doing this because we have an actual threat going on. So it's almost like different administrations say, hey, here's a door if you'd like it, and yet if there's nobody behind that door, we're not going to go in there.
Right. So you stop with Ray. Keep going.
And now we have Kash Patel, and so it's disappointing that he seems to want attention. So again, the direct opposite of him was Bob Mueller, who I didn't feel like cared that much about agents, and yet, okay, I can get by without that. He also didn't get involved in my life. He didn't get involved in my cases. He was too busy running the FBI and testifying and taking care of things. And now with Patel, there are more cases where agents are being called away to go to Memphis for 30 days to, help out there. And there's a lot of arbitrariness and caprice involved with that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Taking care of his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Well,
why would that even be something that you would think you would say? That's I just prefer, like, look, agents are going forward, the FBI is going forward, and you give nobody anything to even chirp about. That would be my preference.
Okay. But I think it's fair to say, again, going back to the idea. Let me go back to that initial idea that I had, that and let me explain where I'm coming from with the question. When I say democracy is not built on granite, what I mean by that is, if the court comes down and orders the president or orders the executive to do something, it's only because we have agreed that we're going to follow the court's orders that democracy exists. If we have a dispute with that agreement, what is the court going to do? Send the bailiff over?
Yeah.
And then the president's got the Secret Service and the SEALs and the nukes. So there's no way for the court to enforce its orders other than the fact that we trust the institution. and we agree, by consensus to be ruled by law. And if that agreement starts to fray, it is a problem for democracy. And what keeps that agreement together is trust in the institutions. That's what I'm talking about when I say democracy is not built on granite. It's fragile. It's fragile. It depends on our trusting the institutions. And what I get concerned about is when we have somebody like Patel as the head, and I'm you can mince words. I'm going to call him a clown. I'm not going to ask you to do that, but the guy is, he is a character. At least we can say that. And he doesn't give me the feeling of trustworthiness, and then we start to fray the trust in the institutions. But what I appreciate, from your perspective is that once you get out of that level, it's the same old FBI.
Yeah. And I trust in that. So even if there are distractions or agents getting pulled away for 30 days, 2 weeks, whatever it is, and on a rotation, the FBI is still doing what it's doing. So this guy isn't getting the work done. Okay, he's got 8 other people on his squad and 4 task force officers. So the bureau will find a way. So
To get,
it's just it's more of an annoyance. It's not a stinging insect. It's a gnat that buzzes
I
and you
get you.
don't like it.
I get you. And you feel like it is repairable.
Yes. Oh, yes. Uh, I don't see that the FBI is going to have such a wholesale change that they get far away from that same mentality that I came in to, which is we do things professionally, we do things well, we do things morally, constitutionally. I mean, I've had conversations with agents where we are discussing whether we should do something, even though it's legal. Like, well, I don't know if we're exposing this. I mean, there's times where we've executed search warrants, but we've done it in a way to say, hey, we're gonna park over here and walk in so not to expose you. I've done that many times. I've taken guys in, pulled vehicles into a garage because the news is outside. Okay, look, you're going to prison. No need to have shame too. I'm going to do you a solid. Maybe this helps in a confession later. Who knows?
Yeah, right. So, a popular concept, and I can ask this question from personal knowledge because having been a prosecutor myself, I already know the answer to the question, but I want you to answer it. There is this popular perception that law enforcement, the FBI, prosecutors, they're all kind of up in that, give the politicians and the rich guys a break and the like. And my experience has always been that if we got some hotshot guy, we got some celebrity, we got somebody who really has done something wrong, that's like, oh boy, let me add it. I want that case. It's like it's almost an enjoyment to take down somebody that thinks they're above the law.
Well, I would disagree with you when you say almost, because it is an enjoyment. Yeah. And not to target someone just because they're, high up, but
Right.
absolutely. I mean, I had a buddy who had a case on 4 city council members taking bribes. That was great. That was
Hmm.
great to say, you're not above the law. You can't do this. We had one renowned activist in our area who was just a loudmouth, a provocateur, and not in a good way, not in the causing good trouble type,
Hmm.
but the kind of like making false accusations
Hmm.
against people. Great to take him down. Anytime we have cases like that. But then also, I don't know if you've heard this adage as well, big cases, big problems, small cases, small problems. Now, when you're going after someone who's got clout and has friends in strong positions, now you're going to have possibly some defense coming at you, some difficulties added to the mix, not just an easy case on a dope dealer that, everybody's glad to see go away.
Oh yeah, no question about the fact that money buys defense, and they'll paper you to death, and your work will be much harder. But ultimately, you rise to the challenge, uh, and and like I say, it's just fun to take down somebody who thinks they're above the law.
Well, I remember early in my career, we had an inspection. And so one of the agents coming in doing the inspection, I was chatting with him about cases, and I was working drugs at the time. And he said he had a case on an NFL player who was borderline Hall of Famer. Like, he was good. And it was known that this guy had gotten busted for narcotics. And he said high level people came to the prosecutor. Prosecutor said, "We're not doing this case," and he said it was a slam dunk case, and yet, here he was saying, "Okay, well, looks like we're not doing this one."
And that happens too.
Yeah.
That happens too, but it not at the agent on the street level. You'll never find an agent on the street will love to take down the hotshot.
Dog with a
Now,
bone.
the pressure can come,
Yeah.
From above.
But the agent wants to do these cases, especially if they're righteous. That's when, again, you get a dog with a bone, you're not going to get it away from them. unless you're a prosecutor, responding to somebody higher up, and then like smack them on the nose.
One of the things that the TV shows love to explore is the whole idea of giving somebody a deal to flip. And sometimes that can be not heartbreaking, but it can be a real difficult decision. Somebody that's done something really, really bad, and to give them a slip because they've got something that's really, really helpful. Do you have any stories or any times in mind when that was a tough call?
Not when it was a tough call. The prosecutors I worked with were always very reasonable, and part of what they had to balance too was, if you've done this crime, we can't take it down to here. We can only take it down a bit, because now it's the same way when we would pay informants. Like, I always prosecutors would say, like, "You've paid him how much?" And I'm like, "He's done the work." And they said, "Well, we have to disclose that." I'm like, "Okay, like, it's not life-changing money, but we're paying guys for their work." But if a guy has something that can further what I want to do, can go further up the chain or draw more people in, I had no problem whatsoever with having them get what they deserve, which is, okay, I was a bad person and now I'm on this team. The last informant I had when I was in Chicago was a former Border Patrol agent. He was a guy who was waving narcotics in and got busted. And while he was waiting sentencing and going to prison, he was working some time off. And that guy was great. I mean, I was working with a cop. He knew, like, I didn't have to direct him that much because he knew how to do the work. And, you know, reprehensible that he did this before, but that's fine. I'm giving him an opportunity to maybe feel better about himself. Like, if you see somebody who's willing to turn around, that's the difference with you and me and other criminals. So what I saw in ministry was the same people that I saw in the FBI. The difference was people in my congregation would come to me and say, "Pastor, I've done this thing. I don't want to be this person. Help me to turn around, to repent." And the criminals would say, "No, I'm all in. Let's just keep going. This wrong thing is making me money." So at some point, if they're willing to
Mhm.
say, "Yep, I'm going to pay back in some way," great, you know?
Or I'm just gonna give you this
Yeah,
information to save my skin. I might go once I work it off, I may go back to doing it again, but right
yeah,
now,
could
this
be.
seems like a good deal. Yeah, so, the situation with this, girlfriend of Epstein, and she was incarcerated, found guilty, put in a real prison. Then we had a strange interview, normally not done by somebody in that position,
Yep.
normally done by a case agent, right? And then boom, she gets sent over to a country club prison. Now, regardless of the politics that are involved in there, just in terms of how that maps on to the agent on the street, is that something that's going to cause some long term upset, or is it a kind of shrug of the shoulder and a titch and I hated that it
Yeah,
happened and
the
you go on
latter.
with your life?
I mean, it's disappointing, and I don't know, and I've not even heard about the agents who had the original case on Epstein, but I have no doubt that that was a situation where agents are doing their work and doing it well, and then after you present it to the prosecutor, it's out of your hands. And if others are influencing the case where they're saying we want to do this, it's disappointing, but you can't perseverate on it because there's enough crime in front of you to. When I found myself in positions not like that, but akin to it, uh, the only thing I could do is learn and say, okay, I guess that's out there. That these types of things happen. I had a case on a guy who legitimately, not legitimately, but we could have charged him with enough that he could have spent life in prison for these financial crimes. I didn't expect that, but I expected to get 12 to 20 years. And then the prosecutor comes back and says, okay, we're going to give him 5.5. And I thought that's crazy. So, there's so many things like that that are just out of your hands. Judges will go down in sentencing and then you just move
Hmm.
on because you've got other stuff.
Yeah, yeah, you know what I think the great saving grace is, just like when you're a lawyer, you try your case, you prepare it as best you can, you say everything you can. You like Vince
Yep.
Lombardi said, you leave everything on the field. And then the jury comes back, and either you win or you lose, and you go home, and either you celebrate or you cry, and you get up the next morning, and you know what?
Yep.
There's another case to handle, and that's the great savior, I think, in our business. It's that there's
Yeah.
never not
Yeah.
another
I didn't
case.
have to worry about having work to do. And for me, like that was a difference for me between ministry and law enforcement because the things that I endured in the FBI that were frustrating, that were unjust, it, it didn't affect me. I was angry and I moved on because I had something else to work on. I
Move on.
can now solve that problem where something happened that shouldn't have by making it right in this next case. Always something. When
Yeah,
people
yeah,
come to
yeah.
me and say, I think my son is developing a heroin addiction, I'm like, that doesn't go away tomorrow. So that was what affected me. The other things, like you said, you learn from it and say, okay, this is the kind of thing that might happen. And part of that, and I would preach this to the younger agents, you could work 150% and you're still going to get that 80% return. So you followed up
Hmm.
by the prosecutors, by the defense, by informants, by circumstance, by a judge, and you will not get 100% return on your work. So keep that in mind with how much you give to the job.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm
Okay.
going to ask you to tell us a story. Okay. I had the privilege, I suppose you might say, of representing one of the colleagues of Bobby Seale. I didn't know it at the time. His name was affectionately Buzzy, and he had the habit, not the habit, but every once in a while he decided he would go down to the Florida mangrove below Homestead Air Force Base, and he would put on his snake pit boots and he'd walk through the mangroves and he'd look for what he calls square grouper,
Oh,
which was
okay.
kilos of cocaine wrapped in the square. They were square wrapped in fiberglass, which were thrown overboard when the Coast Guard would hit, a carrier boat, and they would float in and they get stuck in the mangroves. So one day he goes down there, he picks up 2 keys, and he's on his way back, and they got a traffic stop coming out of Key Largo. And so he gets busted for the 2 keys. I get a hold of him, representing him, and I say, hey, Buzzy, the only thing that I can do for you, I mean, with the search was good, everything was good, is if you know somebody higher up. And he goes, I don't know anybody higher. I just go down, I go my grouper hunting, and when I get it, I sell it to some doof on the street who's below me. I mean, he's a street dealer. Hey, $5,000 I get for it. I don't know anybody above me. I say, well, you gotta flip on. I mean, you got to go up the
Right.
ladder, not down the ladder, if I want to get you a break. Hey, don't you know anything? So finally, he tells me this crazy story about just during Ronald Reagan's and just say no to drugs and the like, where he was actually flying cocaine in for the cartel into Homestead Air Force Base, and it was offloading it into Ollie North's group, who was getting paid by the cartel for free transport, with which he was buying guns and loading them into his plane and flying them down to the Contras in Nicaragua. He tells me this whole story. I can't believe it. So I go and I talk to the U.S. attorney about it. And you got to go testify in Washington. They send us up there 3 times, send us up to Washington 3 times. The last time they sent us up, there was no hearing going on. Nobody knew anything about it. I come back and I say to the U.S. attorney, what are we going to do with Buzzy's case? She goes, Buzzy who?
Yeah, I could tell where that story was going once, and I've seen the movie. It was a great movie. I had no idea who played you in the film, but that's a good one.
Yeah. No, it wasn't Bobby Seale. It was somebody else. It was that was different.
Yeah.
Different. They just knew each other. They were just co-pilots, but not in the same plane. So you tell us something we don't know. Tell us a fun story.
Okay, my favorite one. So I moved from Chicago back home to Toledo, Ohio, which is the Cleveland division, and was working organized crime. While I was doing that, just getting set up in a new area, trying to make cases. A colleague was working crimes against children, was heading up the task force. He said, "Hey, we've got this case on a pimp named Lucky," and the cases that the FBI would have would be for trafficking in children, the teens. And so they had a case on Lucky for prostituting a few teens. So he was trying to contact some of the victims, some of the witnesses, and influence them to not testify against him. So my buddy goes, "Hey, I want you to monitor his jail calls." And he was calling a lot. So I had all of his calls forwarded to my phone where I could listen live, and I was muted. And from listening to him, I worked up a case on him selling OxyContin and Xanax out of prison. So he was contacting outside sources, and then he had his connections, and he was just running the show. He had stopped trying to influence the girls and now was just trying to make some money. And I made a case further on him, superseding on him, his mother, his uncle, his girlfriend, and a couple others who were, helping to run the drugs. So because I'd done such a great job, new to this area, the case agent said, "Hey, you get your pick. Who do you want to arrest?" And I said, "That's easy. I want Monica, the girlfriend," because I had an idea of what to do. I've been listening for months to hundreds of calls. And so we go to pick up Monica for the drug charges, and she was in a small town. So I stopped by the sheriff's office before we got her, and I said, "Hey, do you have an interrogation room where we can interview the subject afterwards?" And he says, "Hey, do you mind me asking who it is?" And I tell him, and he laughed. He goes, "Oh man, I know that family. Like they're here. They've been in here more than I have. There's no way she's talking." And I said, "Okay, well, we'll see." So we picked her up without incident, brought her in, and I didn't even read her Miranda rights. I just went into explaining, "I'm the guy who's been listening to your boyfriend's calls." And I had a few calls to play for her. And I said, "I want you to listen to this call and tell me what's going on here." And the first call was a woman's voice, and Lucky was saying how much he loved her. And she's like, "Baby, I love you too. We're going to be together when you get out." And I said, "What do you have to say about that?" And she said, "That's not me." I said, "Oh, okay." And I played another one, different woman, same type of conversation. And I said, so how about this? And she said, that's not me either. And I had about 10 ready. I played a third, different woman, and she turned it off and she says, what do you want to know? I didn't have to prove that she was guilty. I just had to prove that there's no reason for her to stick up for her boyfriend because he wasn't. And she gave us everything. We're driving back to the office, and I'm on the phone with the prosecutor, saying, "Hey, we've got one singing," and she says, "Let me have the phone." And she talks to the prosecutor. She says, "I will testify, but I have one demand. I'm first on the stand." And that
She
was the
was
thing. Like,
pissed.
I've been there many times trying to argue with guys about how they're guilty and they need to do the right thing. Didn't even bring up what she'd done. Didn't even say, I know that you're selling drugs. Had nothing to do with that. Here you go.
Jealousy has, what is that expression?
Hell
Jealousy
hath no
has
fury like a woman scorned.
hell had no fury
Yeah.
like a woman
Age-old
scorned.
tactic.
That's
There
it.
we go.
Great. Okay, Eric, tell us something we
Oh, my
don't
goodness.
know.
Something you don't know. So I'll say this. You've been on the other side probably of seeing the evidence, but people look at the FBI, and there's definitely amazing moments that I've got to be a part of. But if you can imagine, like, just driving down the street, picking a house and saying, I'm going to go in there unexpected and have access to every corner of their house and inside their phones and computers and every detail, it's remarkable the kind of things that you find out. And on top of that, these are criminals too, so they're probably a little more deviant. But 24 years of looking into people's private lives, it's very voyeuristic. I had learned many things that I didn't realize were a thing, most sexual. But it's just amazing to have that insight of, we're breaking down your door, knocking on your door, whatever it is, and you're not ready. Here we are, and we can go through everything. There's a lot that people hide.
And there's both in their stuff and in their heads,
and that's often coming
too.
through on the online.
And
now you're seeing what's in
right.
their head. We had one case when I was in Chicago. A federal judge was murdered, and so we were called to work with Chicago PD. Each squad was giving up one person to work with a detective, and so now we're going around trying to solve this. At the time, judge's name is Joan Lefkoe, and she had sentenced a white supremacist who led this world church, I think it was, something like that. She had sentenced him, and people thought, okay, it was either him or one of his followers that killed her. And if I remember correctly, like, her death was on like a significant date. So here we are trying to find these things out and bumbling through over a week or so. Turned out something that we never would have found out otherwise, that there was a cigarette butt that they had found. And so we're interviewing people. Hey, did the husband, no, I'm sorry. The judge, excuse me, the judge wasn't killed. Her husband and mother were killed. So, hey, was a husband a secret smoker, gardener, somebody? So couldn't find out who it was. And the only way that we solved that case was the man who committed the crime was pulled over by police, and as the cop approached the car, gunshot, and he had killed himself and left a note. It was a nothing case. It was a man who was a profitable electrician but had gotten cancer. The surgery had messed him up, and he was trying to sue the surgeon, and in the process the judge just kicked the case and said, there, she wouldn't even hear it. And so was it like, if you went through her records, we're looking at people that she sentenced, these bad people, not even somebody who had really been on her docket more than maybe once or twice. And, with all that the FBI has, Chicago PD, just dumb luck. That's how we solved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's like that.
Working dope cases, we'd see drug dealers, just going to a restaurant or a mercado saying, "Hey, can I store my drugs here?" The guy's like, "Yeah, give me 500." So, you see people involved with criminal activity, but not carrying it out themselves. They're guilty in the sense that you and I think they are, but they're not guilty in how they would be charged. There's much that I have an awareness of, and the cynicism is something I had to be aware of, have self-awareness along the way, because every day you're checking in, clocking in 8:30 in the morning, and all day I'm looking for crime. And so it's easy to think, people are terrible. And you had to have that awareness of, no, this is what
Uh-huh.
I'm doing. I see so many birds because I'm a bird watcher. That's why I see this. I'm looking for crime. That's why I see so much criminal activity. So that had to be something to keep in check
Mhm.
and just be mindful of along the way. So I don't think that I'm jaded from it. Give you an example. My youngest kid was working at a restaurant and said, "Yeah, Frank's our dishwasher. He's 45 years old." And I go, "Frank's a felon." Because you're not going to be a 45-year-old man and wash dishes at a restaurant unless you're a felon. And I mean, that's just a thing where you go, "Oh yeah, that guy's a felon."
See genuine goodness, that it really moves you by comparison, or even not by comparison. I always think of Anne Frank, the little Jewish girl who was hidden by the family in Amsterdam and wrote in her diary, after years of hiding, eventually being discovered and sent to a concentration camp and dying. But in her diary, she writes, in spite of it all, I still think that human beings are good at heart. And that's always something that has steeled me and say this is what human beings are attainable for. They have not only an incredible potential to do harm and evil, but they also have an incredible sense of hope and love and belonging as well.
Well, so at the same time that every day I was checking in and looking for crime, I was also working next to and along with people who were dedicating themselves to resolving that. So I did get to see many good people. And then, I worked with informants who were serving the United States for no reason other than patriotism. They weren't getting life-changing money. They were, getting paid. I had one informant that I pitched, and he started working for us, and he was probably the most productive informant in our division. And I would tell him, like, "Buddy, you're not getting paid for all the work you're doing." He's like, it makes me better at what I'm doing. And you get people like that who there's no reason for them to stick their necks out, to be discovered, to maybe be harmed, and yet they're dedicated to this. So yeah, as much as I'm looking for criminals, I'm also working with those who are stepping forward and helping me to fight this. And so that's encouraging. I was also exposed to a lot of that where, I mean, I got paid
Hmm.
well by my standards, but here's informants who are, you know, doing dangerous things. I had one who went,
And not only that, but there's also a lot of pastors out there. You know what it means
yeah,
to be a pastor.
that's hard. I
That's
couldn't do
hard
it.
stuff. That's hard work.
So I'd see that,
Yeah.
but I tell you
Yeah.
what also I'd see is I'd come home from a search warrant, in these disgusting places, and hug the kids and say, "I'm sorry for being so hard on you about cleaning your room because it's not so bad." Yeah,
It's not so bad. I often thought when I was working, with a lot of state police, state and county and local police. Sometimes people would ask me about this, that, and good cops and bad cops, and I always kind of felt that every every law enforcement officer, probably everybody in every career, but I'm just focusing on, since we're here speaking, that every cop comes to a point where there's a fork in the road, and he wants to get the bad guy, but if he honestly says what occurred, it ain't gonna fly, and something's gonna get bounced. And it's so easy just to say, "Oh, the
Mm-hmm.
guy had a broken taillight," when it wasn't broken, to justify the search. And they come to that fork, and they don't want to let the bad guy go. And some go down the side. They say there was a broken taillight, and the others say, "No, I had a hunch, and I'm sorry, but I'm glad I stopped him, but I that." And they just tell the truth. Those that follow, that take that left turn, I mean right turn, whichever. Those that take the hit when they make a mistake,
Yep.
they go on to be the best. And the others, they stay in a kind of fog of okayness. What do you
Absolutely. And
think? Do you
I was
agree?
fortunate in the FBI to be that with a group of people like that. And there were occasions, like, it's so rare that I can tell you that I remember when this would happen, that someone would, like we're doing, we have an arrest warrant, so we're clearing the house, and then guys are opening drawers to a desk and like, hey man, I don't know what you expect to find there, not a body, and anything you do find is illegitimate. So there are occasions like that, and it
Mm-hmm.
might have been just like a reaction, like guys are curious. I don't know. But there's so few times that that would happen, that because agents were trying to do things above board always. And it, for me, when I witnessed that, guys going through desk drawers, I went to a buddy afterwards and he's like, yeah, I saw that too. And I said, if you ever see me acting inappropriately, put your hand on my shoulder and I'll respond properly. And then I waited. And then he said the same to me, because we're not perfect. We might get caught up. It could be anger.
Mm-hmm.
It could be just
Mm-hmm.
not realizing what I'm doing. But across the board, there's so few like that of agents who, not even dirty. Yes,
At
with the
your
FBI,
level,
and,
at
and
your
even
level, you know,
it
at the
can
local
be,
level,
and
it's a
that's
little
what the
different.
benefit with being in the FBI is. Like the standard is way
Yeah,
up
yeah.
here. Like we had the agents that got the applicants who got turned down to be agents. I'm sure there's many great ones. They just didn't make it. But you got to be pretty clean to
Yeah,
be in
yeah.
there too.
Well, and and it was your own internal moral fabric, which brought you to that. But there was also, and I'm going to put a little plug for the defense lawyers, there's also something else. You
Yeah,
knew there would be somebody like me who's going to
yeah.
be asking you questions,
I
right?
I would have these discussions with agents, and we're just playing around. But you'd hear stories about Let me back it up. I had a case on one of my coworkers, a task force officer, a sheriff's detective, who stole $900. So on a case that he had, drug dealer who had murdered his girlfriend, like that guy doesn't deserve the money. Like I can justify that easy. Reached in the envelope, grabbed what he grabbed, and unfortunate for him, policy for that office was to count the money, like just bundle it and count it off scene, because if you're doing it in a hurry, you get a miscount. Now you got problems. What he didn't know is that deputy had turned on his body camera, called somebody else over, so the two witness it, counted it out, like the number of bills, everything, and even broadcast it on the radio, which is how I know dude didn't have his radio on when he was going to the scene. And later, now listening to jail calls, someone hears, "Hey man, I have $900 missing." They said it's only 1,800. I had 2,700, and everything was on camera the whole way except for like a 10-second blip where he was in his office outside of the cameras and helped himself to money.
Mm-hmm.
$900 is not worth it. And I would ask agents, like,
No.
hypothetically, how much money would it be worth for you to put your job on the line and your reputation? And, again, if we're going to talk hypothetically, it's going to have to be millions. you know, I don't,
Yeah,
I'm
right.
not going to put my career on the line for a busted taillight, for, a dope case or something. just not worth it.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of the old joke of the fella who hits on this chick at a bar, and he says, "Ma'am, would you go up with me to my room for $1 million?" And she thinks about it and she goes, "Yep, yeah, I would." And he says, "Well, would you go for $100?" And she goes, "What kind of a woman do you think I am?" And he says, "Well, we've already established that. Now we're
Right.
just haggling over price." Hey, Eric, it has been absolutely a pleasure. This has been a wonderful chat with you, and I really want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank you for your service. 24 years serving this country as you did is no small matter,
Well, I
and it
appreciate that.
means a
Thank you.
lot. And sharing, with our listeners, the sense and the feeling that no matter what kind of chaos we might be getting every day in our daily news diet, that there's still a whole bunch of people that are out there just doing their job and keeping that professionalism up. And I think that is that reduces our anxiety a little
Very
bit. So I
good.
thank you for that
Well, if
as well.
folks enjoyed some of the stories we've been bantering and want to hear more, I've written a book about.
Oh,
I
that's
got to
right.
make
You've
sure we
written
get
a
that out.
book.
So
That's right.
the book is
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
out in the fall,
absolutely.
and it's entitled "Irreverend: From Saving Souls to Chasing Sinners in the FBI." So I tell the story of how a Baptist pastor went through years on SWAT, crazy investigations, working with teen prostitutes and actual terrorists, and if folks want to follow along and find out more about the book when it's going to be released, they can go to my website, which is preacher2breacher.com.
Well, we'll definitely have that in the show notes, and getting back in touch with you. And I wanna offer you an invitation when it comes
Yeah,
time to launch the book. I'd love to have you back on to talk about the book and the publishing, getting it out, tell some more stories. I'd love to have you on. So hold on to my contact information.
absolutely.
You know how to
Yep,
get a hold of me at the Flow. And we'll see you again
absolutely.
at the launch of your book. And thank you so much again, Eric.